I'm really excited here today to be here with Matthias, who is a product leader at Grab, and one of our earliest partners, kind of design partners, and one of our earliest customers. And so we're just going to talk a lot about some of the challenges that we've overcome together and the core problems in the existing workflows for a consumer application like Grab. How Aampe operates, but really more generally how what we see as agentic infrastructure operates. So you can think through some of these more of like from a first principles perspective, and then we'll just use a lot of illustrations and examples from an actual incredibly powerful business that's doing amazing things in a fascinating part of the world, which we don't always get to hear about here in San Francisco. I actually just recently moved back from Singapore to San Francisco, and we've seen some really incredible things about the way mobile and the way consumer technology works in Southeast Asia. So excited to hear about some of that from Matthias today. So we'll introduce ourselves in a minute. In fact, I'll get Matthias.
Sure.
Please introduce yourself.
Hey folks, I just got in last night from Singapore. So my team sort of leads our product team that does everything communications. But what's really relevant today is kind of our one-way communication. So how do we serve and engage with our customers across Southeast Asia? And then we can maybe share a little bit about Grab in a second as well.
Yeah, let's start with Grab.
Okay, so just for context for everyone here, so Grab is live in 8 markets in Southeast Asia. We cover about a population of 700 million. We have about 48 million monthly transacting users. I think to put it in context, we operate in 800 cities in Southeast Asia. But maybe to kind of I kind of put our verticals down here to just contextualize for everyone in the US. Imagine you take an Uber and a DoorDash. That's kind of our mobility and deliveries business. Then you add on top of that kind of a Chime, a SoFi, that's our digital banking. You add a PayPal, that's our financial services. And then not just that, but we also own our actual grocery stores in a couple of markets. So that's kind of our business. We have tens plus verticals across the region. So our challenge is we have a lot of things we want to tell our users about. And this is not in separate apps. It's all in a single super app that we have to sort of engage our users. So that's the challenge that me and my team is trying to do and where Aampe sort of comes in.
Yeah, and Grab is the leading super app in this space in the region. So the scale is pretty incredible just from a technical perspective of serving that. And then you layer on the complexity of the diversity, all the different languages. Singapore itself has 4 official languages. And then you've got all the different countries with different character alphabets. There's a lot of technical details in handling that. And then you layer on top of that the complexity of handling all the different value propositions and helping people discover those in the right way.
Yeah, and I think you have sort of the language differences. Obviously, there are a lot of different languages. I think just cultural differences. Like what a campaign might work at 5 p.m. in Bangkok doesn't work in Singapore. What every single market, not just by countries, but down to the cities, what works in Manado in East Indonesia doesn't work in Bangkok or Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam. So we have to be hyper local. That's kind of that's our bread and butter. It's how we won in the region over Uber, et cetera. So how do we do that at scale across all these verticals, different offerings? That's really kind of the external complexity that we have.
And one of the factors that was always amazing to me when we thought about what we were seeing with Grab is that oftentimes we think about communications between our business and our own complexity and where our customer is, and in terms of things like Matthias has pointed out, in terms of cultural expectations. There's also the fact that they're dealing with, there's a lot of exogeneities where the other businesses, competition, forces that they're being exposed to are also operating differently in those different markets. So people's expectation for the rate at which they're messaged in Indonesia is very different than what they would expect in Singapore. And partly that's because the fact that other businesses in the finance space, in the food delivery space, in the ride-hailing space, in the entertainment and travel space, et cetera, are all operating. They're all trying to communicate to the user at the same time. And I think that is interesting to me because the complexity of Southeast Asia, to me, is an idealized form of actually what we all face in the world today. Even simpler businesses in a single market like the US, you're still facing the fact that you do have multiple value propositions, usually multiple features and functionality that you're trying to communicate, and your customers are being inundated and are being exposed and are being served by a lot of other businesses. So this is just an extreme version of what we all face, and I think that's why we can learn a lot from the story here. Before we get to that, I'm just going to introduce Aampe for a second. So I co-founded Aampe in 2020 with two other machine learning scientists. We all kind of came from the intersection of cognitive science, neuroscience, so we think a lot about the problem of making inferences and statistical inferences and thinking about how people make decisions in complex environments, and then doing that in the context of consumer technology. So how can we build applications that help people make better decisions in complex environments? So Aampe is backed by a couple of great funds, Peak 15, which used to be Sequoia out of Southeast Asia, and recently, a couple years ago, globally split from Sequoia and rebranded as Peak 15. Z47, Theory Ventures here in San Francisco. We're used by customers in over 15 markets, and have team members in 16 different countries. I previously co-founded a consumer mobile app in India, so it's a mobile application to help lending. So came very much from that background of thinking about how do we build applications that can scale and handle the complexity of the diversity of our users and the noise that they're facing. So that's just a quick rundown of Aampe. We're active in Europe especially and in the US, so some great customers in Europe like Deezer. Actually, we have one of our partners from TaxFix, which is the leading tax provider. It's sort of like the TurboTax in Europe and based in Germany. And he'll be speaking about some of the complexity they face tomorrow. So this is just a little bit of Aampe. There's a bunch of team members from Aampe in the back. If you want to hear more or get to know us, we're always happy to chat. So let's jump back to Grab, and maybe Matthias, you can speak to, so these are all the benefits and the value propositions that Grab's providing, but how do those get operationalized in terms of, especially from a comms perspective, there's so many teams that are singly focused on driving usage of food delivery or financial services, and your job is to coordinate all of that.
Yeah, that's right. So I think we talked a little bit about sort of the external complexities around culture, competitive nuances, different markets, et cetera. But I think this slide kind of illustrates, this is just a snapshot of kind of all the services we do. We do Grab Bike as mobility because you can't get around traffic in Southeast Asia if you have to be in a car. This is kind of all the services we do. Each of these services also have vertical teams who all want to communicate to the customers. Our mobility team want to talk to our customers all the time. Our food delivery business want to talk to our customers all the time. But the real problem we have, and like historically what we have done is kind of like, we then have kind of a weekly meeting where within each country we were negotiating and saying, oh, this week food is going to get maybe 70% of our comm slot of the volume. And we kind of does this like manual negotiation. This clearly doesn't scale. All of our teams know that this is like super like it's not personalized. It's basically from a business perspective, what do we want users to hear about? So this is an example of kind of how Grab can interact with you, like how you can interact with Grab throughout the day. And you can kind of see across all of the verticals we do. These are like 10 different things I want to tell you about throughout the day. How do I figure out the right thing to tell you in this particular moment about, instead of it being kind of, hey, we want food to be the top priority, so we're going to keep telling you about food. So the complexity is really like, we have tens of different teams who have different messages for our users. How do we find the right way of communicating that to each user, where it's not sort of globally optimized and saying, we're going to get 50% to this vertical, but how do we find the right thing for each user? That's really kind of the complexity that we're going through. So how this is done is, historically, we have country marketing teams in each of the markets who sort of sit down and plan this out. And I think we actually did an illustration on the next slide of kind of maybe the complexity of how this is being done. This is just, ignore what the names are. This is how we do it. This is how every single market basically runs a spreadsheet of a comms calendar for every single channel we have of, here's how we're going to plan out the week. You can clearly see this is, first of all, it's very complex. No one likes to do this meeting. It's like a manual negotiation where we're kind of horse trading, saying, oh, you get a slot here, you get a slot here. But it's also just not very customer-centric. This is like fully business-centric. This is how we want, like what we want to go out. This doesn't scale, and no one likes doing this. It's not personalized. That's kind of the problem that we were having.
It feels, when you're when you're planning it out, I think early stages, it feels like you can make a lot of sense and you can structure it in a particular way. It feels like an illusion of control. And then what you just started to realize is that, that earlier slide shows the diversity of services, but also shows the diversity of people. And it makes sense to send, in some ways, a notification, for example, about food delivery around dinner time. But then it just turns out that a lot of people either have dinner plans or aren't eating dinner at the same time for all various reasons. In fact, I'll share just a quick illustration of this. I remember about 6-7 months after we started operating Aampe with Grab. And basically what Aampe does is provision an agent for every single end user. And so the agent makes decisions, takes the opportunities to communicate that the team is setting up, and then makes tactical decisions by running experiments and reinforcement learning and other kind of specific methods to make these decisions. And I remember actually another member of the team at Grab, who's actually in the back, is now at Aampe. I remember she sent me an email about some of the team receiving a food delivery snack notification later in the evening on a particular day. And their first instinct was, oh, that's surprising because we send notifications at 7:30 for food because we see a lot of dinner deliveries. And you realize that the reality is the world now is just full of niches. It's full of diversity. It's full of lots of different specific people solving for specific needs. And so we took a look and we said, wait a second, why are we getting a particular notification later in the evening? And so we just looked and aggregated agents sending at those times and realized, okay, it wasn't everybody was receiving it. It's just that about 4 to 7% of agents over those courses of weeks were landing on deciding to send something about food between the hours of 9:30 and 11:30. And you're able to kind of put rules in place. So you can say, this is the last time, this is the earliest time. But within those times, you're giving the agents flexibility to learn and figure it out. And what's cool about that was that once we saw that, we were also able to see that the take-up rate, the transaction rate subsequent to those notifications was actually really high. And we kind of did a little bit more user research, but kind of the conclusion, the sort of story we came to is that Singapore and Kuala Lumpur and Malaysia are actually very international cities with a lot of folks working on international time zones. This was later in the pandemic as well, and so people were working remotely. And you realize that there's some set of people who, like myself, when I was in Singapore, often on calls till midnight with Europe, with the US. And when you're in that situation, you think about the need of the moment. You got some stuff, you're running out of energy. You've been on a lot of Zoom calls, you've done a lot of meetings, solving problems like this. And you need that pick-me-up. And so you can go to the refrigerator and grab a snack, or you can realize, wait a second, I've used Grab to order lunch. But you can also use Grab to order a protein smoothie, or a small brownie, or something else that you might want that late point at night. And that's what Grab wants, is we want to be able to serve users where they are, with the need of the moment for them. It's just that we can't figure out manually which 4 to 7% of users need that late night notification. You can't predetermine that, especially because we double-clicked a third time and found that only about 30% of those users had ever ordered late night before. And it becomes a usage problem. You've not ordered late night before, so you just don't think about that context of using the service. So that's just sort of an illustration of like the problem to be solved for, that this makes it very difficult to solve for.
Yeah, I think just on the food thing, I think the way we have traditionally sort of, when you go talk to our marketing team, I just spent all of last week in Bangkok with our team there. When you speak to them, it's sort of, we often think if I speak to the food marketing team, we think about, here are the morning deals. This is how you get your bagels and your coffee, and then this is your lunch deals, and then we have like a late night snack deal. And it'll kind of we have very rigid structures, and it's kind of like, okay, Monday morning, we're going to communicate about this breakfast option, and then Tuesday lunch, it's these snack options. But I don't know about you guys, but I don't always eat the same thing and at the same times every day. And I think that's kind of the problem with how we have historically solved for this, whether it's sort of through life cycle journeys or even our sort of ad hoc marketing. It's just that it's very rigid, it's very segment-based. And it's the reason why we do the segment-based and time-based is to try and be personal. But we can do much better now. Like, we don't have to just stop at the segment of these are the users we think will convert to food. We can actually let a machine figure out for each user what is the optimal time to convert them, what is the optimal merchant to tell them about, or is it even food for Paul or John or whatever it is. And I think that's kind of been the liberating thing for our team, has been, instead of being stuck in this structure where there's kind of a finite set of slots in a given week, and then we fight over the finite slots and we say, oh, damn it, this week I only got like 5% of the slots, my business is gonna go really poorly. It is, no, just think about what are all the potential like high valuable content you could tell our users about, put them into a machine, figure out, like, let the machine figure out who should get what at which point. But the job turns more from kind of this fighting over finite slots to, wow, I can now like have an abundance of content that I can tell our users about, which has been really freeing for our marketing team.
Absolutely. So we go from this, which is thinking about all our different data sources. So these, the apps are over so many different kinds of devices, so many different country stacks, so many different vertical sort of parts of the back end where you have to integrate all those specific events if you wanted to try and manually plan it. And then you have to set up all those tools. And a place like Grab, which is such a big business, they have so many tools in place, the complexity of that becomes an issue. And then you've got to basically have those local marketing teams or those central marketing teams and all the different marketing teams operating to figure out what are these segments are, what are these triggers. And then you got to go operationalize. You got to say, I'm going to take all that spreadsheet and I'm going to convert it into my comms and I'm going to send it out. So we can talk a little bit more about the complexity of it, but we can also kind of think, again, let's just talk a little bit about what how Aampe is trying to solve for this and help companies like Grab solve for this. It's sort of saying, well, if I'm communicating with my users, I'm communicating them in the app, in notifications, potentially in WhatsApp, potentially in SMS or email. And in every case, I'm saying something to a user. Oh, I'm not stepping on a wire, but anyway, we're good. Technical complexity as always. In every one of those cases, I'm saying a lot. So I might be emphasizing snacks, but I'm also emphasizing the convenience of ordering them versus the discovery factor of finding something that's really delicious. There's many different ways and reasons why I might want to use the application. It's not just that it's convenience. It's also sometimes less convenient in the sense that I could step out my door and go into a late night shop fairly easily and Grab, but I couldn't discover the delicious thing that I really wanted at that moment, but Grab can help me do that. And then connect the dots in terms of it being available when I want it. So what Aampe does is just allow teams to attach the agents and, like Matthias said, is create much more abundantly, create many possible versions that are all connected and tracked across all of the specific units of an action, of the communication. And then have those and just think in terms of the rhythm of, I have machines, I have agents, figure out which ones users are responding to, and then think as I go forward, how can I be more creative, think about more context in which I can integrate more sources of information and put that back into the hands of the agents for them to go out and communicate more and just make this sort of flywheel happen much more rapidly than the old segmentation process. So maybe, Matthias, you want to talk to how some of the ways you guys have been innovating with labels and these concepts and tracking them across multiple teams.
Yeah, so now you kind of have the context on maybe why Grab is somewhat complex in the region. You kind of have from Paul how we set it up. I don't know about you guys, I hear a lot of solutions. Let's make it very concrete. So this is kind of how, this is the pilot use case that we launched with. So you can think of it as, we kind of launched with a product marketing use case, which is we launch new features every single month. Our product marketing team is responsible for driving adoption of those features. Now, if you ask any product marketeer or product manager, they'll tell you, you have a lot of different benefits or CVPs for why you should use a product. But often in our spaces, we're very limited. So let's say we're launching advanced booking, like a scheduled ride. Often we'd be very limited to what are the 3 key CVPs of benefits you can tell a user about. If you ask any product manager, they'll tell you, no, there's actually 10 reasons why you should do it, but these are just the top 3 ones. So where sort of AMP was really powerful for us, and this is a very concrete example of it, was when we set up, in this case, the example over here where it says plan ahead, ride smoothly, book in advance for a smooth and hassle-free ride. That's just one CVP. So what we actually did in AMP is we set it up for this one product of advanced booking. We have a lot of different benefits. So the way we do it is we label the actual content we set up. So in this case, book in advance for a smooth, hassle-free ride is talking about kind of the interior, like the motivator of convenience. But you could also talk about, there could be a cost-saving element to it. So there could be different value propositions that you use. Now, that's helpful in that we can then talk about all the different benefits of advanced booking. But where it gets really powerful for us is we start now learning for each user what they respond to. So today we're launching advanced booking, but let's say tomorrow we're launching family account, or I think Uber calls it Uber for Teens, where you can now send your teenagers on a ride or your elderly parents on a ride. But we have now learned something about you from how we communicated in the past. So if we communicated in the past about convenience or safety, which is like a core pillar of Grab and how we started, I now know that you responded to safety, or maybe you responded to discounts or value saving, etc. But that means that whenever I communicate to you in the future, I have a notion of what you respond to. Not just did you like this product, but why did you like that product? So when I communicate the next feature or the next product to you, I can now build on top of that, and I actually have a very rich understanding of the motivators for what you responded to. So as a concrete example, sort of, in this case it's one, but actually this then leads us to having multiple benefits across different products that we get very, very personalized on how we communicate it to our users.
Which also becomes a team orchestration element to this as well. Because what we've got here is not just the different contexts and the different values, but the fact that within a company like Grab, different teams are responsible for different aspects of that business. So you've got your product team that wants to emphasize something like safety because they're responsible for safety as a function. And you got your CRM team, which is responsible for certain retention metrics or something like that. And your product marketing team, which is trying to emphasize certain aspects of specific functionality of advanced booking or family accounts or advanced or group orders where you can split a ride. And traditionally, they're all doing their own messaging, and on that worksheet, they get 5% of the traffic. And then they send their messages, and they're completely siloed and disconnected. The labels and the tags become a way for them to coordinate, where if the CRM team is using the same labels as the PMM team, then the agent can resolve the fact that in one context it's about this, and in another context it's about this, but both are referring to convenience. And the agent is sort of saying, yeah, let me thread this through. So the team actually, the value of their messaging begins to compound because the coordination is handled under the hood by the agent, and the team doesn't have to pick up the phone constantly. Like, make sure this week you talk about convenience, and let's make sure we're coordinated. No, they can kind of give instructions as they come up to the agent, and the agent is doing the coordination in the infrastructure layer.
Yeah. And I think it really sort of hits home when we started with, the pilot, I think we'll have some data to show as well after, but like we started a pilot where we just sort of talked about 4 products to start with. But what's cool is that now the team can go in all on their own. They can go in and set up for whatever feature they launch. But the agents don't have to learn from scratch because they now already have an understanding of, hey, Paul is responding to safety as a value proposition. So whatever new feature or product we launch, you're not starting the learning from scratch. You've actually already done a lot of learning around it. So this was our pilot. This is how we started with just four products. And there's some data on like how well we did in actually for the product marketing team sort of driving adoption of these products. And the numbers speak for themselves is very well. But I think the really key part is actually the very small bullet point at the end here, which is we started with the 4 features, and it was very high touch initially for us to get it set up properly. But then after that, the team now has full control. Like the product marketing team doesn't have to go talk to me. They don't have to talk to Aampe. They don't have to talk to a product manager to give them space in the app. They can go set up this content, and it'll automatically flow, it'll automatically personalize, and it's all compounding. Every single time we show a user, whether it's this surface in-app, or it's a push notification, or it's another channel, the learning compounds on a user basis. That's really where I think the key unlock has been for us.
Yeah, awesome. So we could talk more about results as those grow and as those compound. We could talk more about the technical enablement of like what's involved. We can talk about the operational complexity and how you kind of go through change management as you help teams adopt new technology that they're used to. That's certainly a big issue. I know I was talking to Matthias last week, and he was in Bangkok, and kind of getting in market with a team and understanding their local conditions and their local concerns and kind of helping them onboard is a big part of any complex organization adopting new technology. So we can speak to that too, but rather than us kind of like, again, contextually just sort of speaking from us, I'd love to open it up a little bit early and see kind of what kind of questions or thoughts there might be that we can speak to so we can actually adjust to where there's interest and where there's curiosity.
This is super interesting. The whole model of one agent per person and then multiple agents per individual coordinating, being able to make decisions, based upon not just one app, but multiple types of apps. Aside from asking this question, I wonder if you had any thoughts on the Amazon perplexity kerfuffle that's happening now, where Comet, the agentic browser, goes out and makes decisions for you using agentic AI, but Amazon is saying you cannot do that on the Amazon platform. Have you heard this last couple of days? Do you have an opinion on that? Because it seems to play in that space.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. Maybe I'll just sort of speak to it very briefly and then contextualize in the context of what we're talking about today. There's a lot of view in the world that the way it will work is that as users, we will just go and get our own agent, our Perplexity agent, our ChatGPT agent, or whatever our agent is. And then that agent will go out and interface with the rest of the world. And my view is that doesn't understand the operational complexity of what that agent needs to solve for. Let's take food. I can have an agent that knows everything about me, but understanding the very live, real, complex food space as it is evolving in real world, right? The restaurant that you loved 6 months ago after the chef quit is not the same restaurant. The restaurant that's amazing but is just dealing with massive crowds because it's so amazing and just isn't fun to go to anymore is not the same restaurant as you thought. Things are changing. Users are responding to it. And that's very hard for an individual agent to really respond to. I think what Amazon is pushing back against is all the different ways that can be quite problematic for one person to be like, let me get agents and just do a bunch of stuff in a very fast way, scaling beyond myself as a human. But the other side of it is just that in many ways, for example, with Grab, they are in the best position to give you a really highly attuned agent to you to solve for your food discovery and nutritional goals and all of those things in the food space. So the reason we started Amp the way we did was because we were like, a lot of times investors would ask me in the early days, why don't you just build the personal consumer agent? And I would say, because I think enterprises and businesses are solving a lot of operational problems that are really important. I'd rather give them the infrastructure that allows them to provision an agent for an end user. An agent that knows its domain, knows its discipline. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about taxes. Right? Taxes are complex. I don't want you to try and train your ChatGPT to figure out how to help you with taxes. I want an expert on taxes to be able to have the software for them to assign an agent to you to help you solve your taxes. And it's the same thing in the context of food delivery. Definitely an agent for every user, but I think an agent that is managed and guided by a domain operational expert authority like Grab is a much better version of the future and what I expect to see happen. They can be so much efficient, so efficient. And because Grab owns all of the agents for all of their users, they can make sure that those agents are effectively coordinating. So your agent is not just learning from you, it's learning from the other agents that are working with people that are similar to you. Because otherwise, like, food is expensive, right? You only get to eat one lunch a day. And if you waste it on a poor meal, that's a shame because your agent didn't know any better. But if your agent can learn from 10 other agents that went to that restaurant and had a really bad experience just in the last couple of days and can reroute you to a better restaurant, that's super powerful. But that happens from coordination, and I think that happens from having humans like Matthias's team behind the agents, making sure that they're appropriately managed and strategically guided. What other questions do we have? Yeah, please, I saw your hand was up.
So I'm a consumer e-commerce founder from India, and Grab has been a big inspiration to the kind of businesses that can be built in Southeast Asian countries. What I'm curious about is that in our company, we are going through this entire product and engineering build, which is where we are trying to do the entire experience really personalized for the user, like the kind of content, products, and offerings that they see on the app. And there's a lot of this personalization that you're doing on the Aampe side, which is about what to communicate to the user at what time, what offering, and so on. So I'm just interested in knowing, like, in this partnership with Grab, because I'm sure Grab would be going through a lot of those things as well. What's the real boundary, right? Like, how does Grab personalize offerings for the user on the app? And then how does it intersect with the personalization that you're building on the AMP side? And are they in sync, or they're like completely different user interest graphs or knowledge graphs that you evolve over a period of time?
So I think from our perspective, I don't think this is kind of a binary, you buy or you build. I think Grab has a large data science team, as I'm sure you're like, that should focus on the things that are core to Grab. So for us, that is our marketplace efficiency. It's our matching, pricing, fulfillment, even food recommendations. So that like is something that inside the app is very core to our business. That doesn't mean that we have to build everything ourselves. But I think it also doesn't mean that because we're using AMP, this is the only way we're personalizing it. I think where the power has really been in what I speak to a lot of vendors. I get pitched a lot of different solutions. I think what's really been really great working with AMP has been how open they are. I think when you work with a lot of vendors, like we work with a lot, where it's kind of like, oh yeah, send us your data and we'll personalize for you and it's a black box. I think here, like I speak to the AMP data scientist and it's been very open about whatever model weights you want to get back. So whatever learning AMP has had on, hey, you respond to like convenience or safety, we can ingest those weights back in and then use that in our own data science models internally. And vice versa, we can actually ship over some of the signals we have from our models to let the AMP sort of agents learn better as well. So for us, it's more of a hybrid model where for some surfaces like push, some of these in-app surfaces, we're using AMP because it's the fastest way for market for us. But it doesn't mean that it's kind of a binary split. I think we pick the right solution and tools where it makes sense, and then we try and invest our resources where we get the best ROI. Yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, this the modularity and interoperability, the reality is every business is building all the time, and they should be building all the time, and tools should help them build better. A lot of it, actually, I'll just refer to what I said in the beginning, which is I was founded by a team with a strong background in thinking about cognition and neuroscience and cognitive science. And so one of the things we often refer to is the misnomer of the analogy of intelligence as being like brain-based and centralized and single-moded. And actually, that's not how it works. Our brains are incredibly diverse, but also a lot of intelligence is happening through our body. It's called embodied cognition. It's what allows us to walk down the street and have a very complex conversation, but also navigate over very uneven terrain. Right? It's the difference between the brain that's helping you decide where to go for lunch and the one that's stopping at the stop sign and turning left. Different systems as well throughout the body, as well as contextual sort of in the world. So our view is that most problems are solved by coordinated intelligence. And yes, you want your data science team to be really focusing on recommender systems, but they're really dependent on certain kinds of data for those recommender systems. And if we just look back to that problem of complexity of all the things that different teams are doing operationally, another problem that we didn't even talk about is when you do that in those manual ways and you do those in those worksheets, it means all those decisions are not reviewable by another team like a data science team. They can't go to the marketing team and say, hey, give us a record of all the decisions you made across all these different spreadsheets. It doesn't work. So in fact, by helping enable the marketing team with agents who are logging everything, making discrete decisions that are tracked, that are experimental, you can also have a data science team programmatically interact with those, give them instructions, for example, to say, hey, it's this burger we want to talk about. But we don't know about the fact that a product marketing team wants to also be talking about a new membership loyalty program or a finance function. And so our recommender doesn't contain that either. And so giving that context to the agent and letting the agent coordinate and orchestrate that is a powerful thing, even for the technical team. So we think very much in terms of building on top of what you use, not as these discrete kind of locked-in vendor systems that don't have that ability to support other parts of the decision system.
I have a little bit more of a forward-looking product innovation question. I think like so much of what you guys are focused on is personalization and AI's power in that. And I'm interested in how you guys have explored or are experimenting in actually like the interaction modalities. So as voice gets better, as the cost to deliver different images and illustrations and videos. So like, I think, you kind of had the flow chart on the board of like got to surfaces, and I think we're going to get to interaction modalities by surface as well. And so really interested in, how you guys are thinking about that kind of frontier, and then any, interesting things you've done in terms of experimentation, especially since you're operating in such a heterogeneous environment.
Yeah, the surfaces piece is so important because once you realize that it's not just in the text, but it is in the modality of the interaction, it's the modality of how you get responses. So maybe Matthias, you want to just quickly speak to, we have it actually up on the slide here, but we're talking about this, which is plan ahead, ride smoothly. But right over here, we realize that at the same time, we also need them to be getting to opt in a different context. That's an instance where you're actively asking the user for explicit feedback. And I think the future of consumer applications is increasingly more and more you can smoothly integrate explicit feedback where you give small tasks. So one of the exciting opportunities I'm really keen for is where we start to sort of, for instance, deliver notifications that offer options that allow you to take immediate action. So here's a recommendation, but don't just open the app and go through and order it. Actually slide it over and add it into your basket for this evening, or set a reminder to it. Or negative feedback, where you say, you know what, you've told me about this, and I was interested, but I'm really just not interested right now. And it's not just an algorithm problem. The future of this is it's definitely not just an algorithm problem. It's an interaction problem. It's the ability to kind of perceive and take results back. And Matthias, like, if you were going to manually set up actual explicit feedback into it would just break, right? So,
yeah, it just wouldn't scale. And I mean, I think the illustration here, this was our pilot. This is sort of starting to talk about just 3 examples of surfaces. They're still very text-based, but you can kind of easily see how these actually start sort of scaling from here. The middle might be very like push notification, which is, I mean, it's core to driving our business, but we're already starting to get into kind of like, oh, what if we start personalizing the image or the color of this? But I think your question had a piece around sort of like, what about new modalities like voice, et cetera? And I think to the previous question, I think this is where the collaboration actually comes in, because we have teams that are working on kind of voice AI agents, consumer agents, really embedded inside of our app, but that's maybe core to what we want to do longer term. We talked about it on the earnings call yesterday, but where it really becomes key is like, if there's learning happening in AMP on how these services are being personalized, if we see a user responding to convenience here, that is an insight that should feed back into whatever we're doing internally, whether it's a voice agent, et cetera. So it's kind of like, it's this mix of, it's not these are AMP-powered surfaces and they live in isolation, and then we have sort of our internal. I think the key is really how do you extract the sort of the derived signals for each user so that you can use them across different modalities, whether they're powered by AMP or internally. I think the beauty of using AMP is that the team is very flexible in how we work together on these pieces.
yeah, we've got some really cool partners that are starting to actually take those scores for those different dynamics and pass them in as system prompts to an LLM. So if you have a chatbot instance where you do want live two-way communication, that's really a problem to be solved by a language model. But you don't want that language model to start from scratch. You want it to have some context to what that user is cared about, and you can't just do that by dumping a whole event stream. You have to kind of create a semantic organization that you can give it to, and so that's what the infrastructure is trying to do. Also, I'll note that when Grab started, we hadn't actually launched our Figma widget. So they had to do a lot of that manually, but now we have the ability to attach, if you're doing design in Figma, you can attach the AMP to it, so you can actually create different layouts, again, different kinds of action buttons, different kinds of cascaded event sequences. And so the design team can also, in advance, say, look, let's not just be expressive and specific in our outbound. Let's actually make the app itself become malleable and responsive to the user, and shifting where you find functionality, where you're introduced to things, as well as what you can give back to the system and kind of train the agent more explicitly, which I think, yeah, is definitely the future. Please.
You guys have walked through so many different aspects of personalization in this presentation, which is really cool. From the offering to the value proposition, to the time of day that you serve things, to the channels that you serve things, to the headline, to the images, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm seeing the power behind this of being able to personalize in many different ways. My question, and this is probably more for you, Paul, is across your AMP portfolio, what types of personalization are you seeing the biggest impact? And like, where are most of your clients starting before they get to the more complex personalization outline like you walked through today?
The question you're asking, I think, expresses one of the biggest realizations for us, and the thing we try and convey and communicate to our partners as rapidly as possible is that the concept of prioritization is so, it feels so right. It feels so intuitive that you focus on one thing and then you do the next thing and you do the next thing. It's hard to challenge that. And in fact, that is one of the central things you have to challenge. The prioritization is a legacy. It's an artifact of the technology that is manual. It's this. You have to, your team has to say, we're going to do this thing. So this month, we're going to focus on this thing. And that's what we focus on. We're going to make sure it's right. And what that clashes with is if the fact that humans are incredibly diverse and they're all over the place. And so if you try and do one thing and move the needle on one thing, you've missed on the fact that one thing is really only relevant to a tiny sliver of people in your base. So what we kind of tried to help realize is that actually you have to start from a parallelization perspective. You have to say, let's give the agents opportunity to talk about a lot of things, not try and solve for one like A/B test where A beats for everybody. Because there's just nothing that moves the needle for everybody. Everybody is very distinct. So it becomes a creative problem where you say, let's try and think about all the possible ways we can speak to users, and then let the agents figure it out. That's also really key because it's really important to solve one of the key algorithmic problems. Historically, if we start with one conversion, one thing we're focused on, because so few people do that at any given time, let's say you're in the e-commerce context, such a small, tiny percentage of the users you're interacting with at any given time are checking out. 90% of the process is shopping. It's discovery. It's not transaction. So if you give your system and you train machine learning with just that end conversion point, you face what's called a reward choke point. Agents just don't see enough success to know what it's like, to know how to get there. The reality is that's because people are mostly focused on much higher processes in the funnel. They're trying to find the function, the feature, the thing that helps them get to the point where they're ready to buy something. And so that for us is very key as we say, let's just let agents have a lot of opportunities to communicate to the users across all of these different things. And again, technically it shouldn't be that hard to do it. Once you've done it once or twice, you're just like, let's just give more options, right? And then the agents find it. A simple analogy I sometimes use is just, think about the context of us as romantic people, right? Like if you're trying to find a match and your long-term goal is a partnership with someone, you want to have children, I have a 6 and 3-year-old, right? They're part of my life. If that's what's in your head when you go and meet somebody for the first time, that's fine. That's your long-term goal. But if you introduce in that first conversation, like, how many children do you want? 9 times out of 10, that's awkward, that's weird. That's not where their head is. Instead, they're looking for a question around, like, what kind of books do you like? What kind of movies do you like? And I think it's similar in the context of shopping. If you get straight to, are you ready to buy? Here's $5 off. They don't even know what they want right now. They don't even know if they want food. If they do, what's the issue in terms of what's going to help them figure it out. So what we want to do is not say, we're trying to drive food deliveries, let's only talk about food deliveries, or let's only talk about this screen. We want to say, let's operationalize agents across many different screens with as many value propositions and many modalities and many opportunities as possible, and let them parallelize their way towards finding what's right for any given user. Does that make sense? Cool.
Cool.
I just have a follow-up to what you just said. So while agents are learning across all of these context variations and all of these different objectives, you don't have to force them to drive a singular result, is it? Like they will keep figuring out what is the right journey to bring the user onto, like the example that you shared in the e-commerce context. Is that something that the agents also do on their own?
Yes, right. So the agent's job is to find out where a user is in their life cycle. But what I'll let Matthias speak to for a minute is, it is the reality that as a business, you know things the agent doesn't know about. You know exogenous factors, you know about business priorities, haven't really been represented within the agent's worldview. So they can't operationalize. So a key goal for us as we've developed the infrastructure is to sort of say, how can we give human teams the ability to update the priors, update the awareness of the agents so that they can respond? A good example might be a lot of seasonalities. Like I just moved from Singapore and I bought a car and I noticed that the car popped up on my screen a Halloween widget. I wouldn't call that personalization, I'd call that contextualization, but that's not something an agent out of the blue can know about. Unless it's like, unless you trained it on historical data like that, in which case, yeah, you're spending a lot of compute for a, for a very lossy sort of process. So the question is, how can humans give that knowledge? And I think that's an important part of like how Matthias is probably evaluating, as time goes by and they decide what they want to focus on as a business.
Yeah, I think maybe when, how do I frame this? When we kind of started out our pilot with Amp, and maybe the results actually kind of have a version of this, I think a lot of teams would like to just kind of do a very naked A/B test of, okay, did you drive the conversion at the end? But what we actually done when we're setting up this content is, step one is kind of defining what does the funnel look like for these products? Because the goal is not just to drive you to the bottom of the funnel conversion for every single message, to Paul's point on dating and finding a partner. Your goal is not just to convert to the end immediately. Users go through a journey. And that journey sometimes needs a lot of awareness. Some users need more awareness. So actually, the agents are not optimizing just to get to the bottom of the funnel, but we define what the funnel steps are, top, mid, bottom. So the reward function for the agents are also looking at, oh, is the user progressing through the funnel, not necessarily just to the bottom, but are they progressing from awareness, mid-funnel? And sometimes users need to go to the mid-funnel multiple times before they convert. So I think that's on one hand. The other hand is then, how do you embed kind of the business priorities? Because we might have thousands of different products to promote, and we have tens of thousands of different content for them, but we do want to kind of put our finger a little bit on the scale of saying, it's not just what the users are responding to, but we might have business priorities around, hey, for the next 2 months, this product is a priority for us. So even though it's not maybe the most optimal for every user, we want to kind of like tip the scales a little bit and put either a discount or a boost on kind of some of the weight. So that's kind of what we can do in the AMP portal as well, is sort of saying, for these labels or for these tags, we want to boost it or prioritize it to kind of hit our goals. Because for us, we don't have a single objective. Like, we have multi-objectives. And when I talk to kind of on that calendar, what's actually embedded in it is 20 different teams who all care about 20 different things. Like, we're all driving in the same direction as a company, but if you are a parcel delivery business head, you don't really care about the food delivery guy. Like, you care about your objectives. So my role is also to kind of cross that across all of our different business lines and make sure everyone is achieving their goals while doing the best for the users. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much, Paul and Matthias. This was fantastic. Give them a big hand, please.